Hello and welcome. I want to share this short session with you today because at this current time, I'm very, very conscious of the level of anxiety and stress that many of our young people and all of us as adults, as grown-ups in this country, are going to be facing and feeling due to the situation in Ukraine, which is truly, truly horrific. From my perspective, I think we need to be thinking very, very carefully now about how we interact with our children, how we support them to be able to effectively navigate their way through this whole situation. And that's it's an enormous ask. I've been desperately reading, trying to find things that I can share with colleagues, with friends who've got younger children who are all concerned about how they are talking to them, how they are supporting them at this time. And I think for many of us, it's just another body blow after 2 years nearly of having to navigate the COVID pandemic. The language that children, young people, and us, the grown-ups, are hearing is war-related. We're being bombarded with these notions, bombs, invasion, death, misery, murder, etc., etc. And I think for many of us, there is this sense that we're not being able to escape from what I would call the 24-hour social media news barricading that we're kind of constantly getting, unless of course we make a concerted conscious effort to switch off. So I think for many of us what we're feeling are increased levels of fear, anxiety and distress, and we are watching daily, I think, and feeling and experiencing the trauma, the speechless terror, as Kolb calls it, that people in Ukraine are experiencing. And for me, on a very personal level, having Ukrainian friends, but also my mother who lived her childhood years from the age of 12 to 16 through the Nazi occupation in Belgium, in Antwerp. Talking to her this last week, there's been a huge sense from her that she's felt very much as though she's had lots and lots of those childhood memories re-triggered. And at the age of 94, and someone who is not very well, this has been really, really traumatic. But every time she sees a child on the television who's crying, who's weeping, who's lost their parent, who's actually seen something, absolutely horrific and terrible, she's saying, this is what I saw, this is what I experienced, and it's all coming back. So I think there's this kind of real comprehensive sense that there's this collective trauma that all of us in this world are currently experiencing, and this is huge. It's really something very, very different and something very, very scary. The contemplation, as she said, of a possible World War III. So what do we do? And hugely tricky, hugely difficult. And I think we just have to start small. We have to start with what we can actually manage to do. And as the grown-ups in the situation, lots of people are saying to me, I don't know how to talk to my kids about this. I'm trying to answer these questions, but I myself am feeling totally overwhelmed. I think it is important that we look to ourselves first, because our children take their cues from us. They mirror us, they sense what we are feeling and what we're experiencing too. So we must try our very best to maintain a level of self-regulation, not actually diminishing our own fears, anxieties and concerns. I think it's important we recognise these, we tell ourselves this is what we're feeling, but we also share that with our friends, with colleagues, with those that can support us and seek the support. This is obviously, it's not a weakness, this is a real strength at this current time to do that. I think as well, taking time out, time away, getting that balance in our self-care routines, but also totally reducing the media intake, because the extended news bulletins every day are just full of the war, quite rightly, understandably so. But it's very important that we keep to healthy routines and get more of a sense of balance. We need to do that first before we then try and support our children. I'm thinking about 11 things that we need to look out for right now. The way in which we present, the language we use, how we interact, the context, what we're already doing in schools, how we create and maintain a balance, how we observe our children and make sure that we're identifying vulnerability factors, how we make use of what I call anxiety easy wins, and also how we celebrate those people who are helping, the helpers. Because there are always helpers out there. Whenever there's a tragedy, there is a helper. and identify how we can help so that we can build some hope. So I'm going to go through each of these in turn. This is not rocket science. It's not phenomenally great psychology or anything like that. This is just something in my own tiny way I felt I needed to do to try and support my friends, my colleagues, anyone out there who is feeling more than fragile at this current time. So 11 things that we can look out for. I think we can look at how we present, and we need to be thinking about how we maintain this steady, calm persona. And a lot of that is related to identifying facts over fiction, being very clear that we're being honest and authentic, but we are maintaining our level of self-regulation. Our children know this. They need to feed off this. We need to be able to co-regulate this with them. I also think we need to look to our language. I did a lovely session yesterday with Powys Educational Psychology Service with some wonderful educational psychologists and mental health leads. And one of the mental health leads identified how, when we're working with younger children, the importance of looking at the language we use, how we explain what's going on. And she said one of the parents came into the playground at her school and said, you know what, I'm saying to my little one, who's about 5, 6, think of the wall like a playground. The bullies come out and the bullies take over the playground and push everyone back, and people are frightened of them. But actually, the bullies can be won over, the bullies can be pushed away. And that's a kind of simplistic way of putting it, but it's child and age appropriate. And I think we need to be doing this. Younger children need to hear messages of safety, messages of security, that they are safe, they are contained, they are loved, and whatever else is going on out there, we will keep them safe. That's important. Of course, older children with a more sophisticated developmental age and also more awareness of what's really going on and more understanding cognitively, it's very important that they have reliable facts, that they are being presented with real, not fake news. And this is important because that kind of reassures them and creates a sense of balance that they so need at this current time. I also think we need to look very, very carefully at our interactive style. Active listening is something that many of us are not particularly good at. We don't tend to do it very often. We kind of listen, but half listen, because we're thinking about what we're going to say next, or we're thinking about something else, or we're worried about something. We possibly are worried about what's going on in Ukraine. But when we're talking to our kids at this current time, it's hugely important that they really feel that we are listening to them. We're taking in what they're saying. And that's very, very important. We don't want them to feel at all that they're not being held safely in the listening context. We need to validate all their feelings and responses, not dismissing them. This is all normal. It's normal that you feel worried. It's normal that you feel anxious about this. Perfectly normal. Anyone would. I empathize with you because, do you know what? I'm worried too. I'm not going to show you quite how worried I am if you're a little one, or if you're a teen who's scrolling down their phone continually. I'm going to be very careful about this, but I am going to empathize with you and say, do you know, it's normal. This is absolutely the way we all feel to some extent. I also think we need to look to the context. So my third or fourth of one of these looks, reassure we're not there. You know, children, younger children think that this war's suddenly going to come into England, come into Scotland, come into Ireland, whatever. They think it's going to jump over all the borders and we're suddenly going to be bombarded with Russian soldiers. And I think, again, be very, very clear about this. This is not in our immediate vicinity in that sense, okay? And it's in our heads immediately, but it's not in our physical vicinity. And our risk is lower, obviously, in terms of being caught up in that conflict context. I also think it's about containment here as well. So containing the context for the child, for the young person. Let's refer them to the right sources of information. For example, BBC Newsround, News for Kids Today, etc. We can then identify accurate and age-appropriate information for them to access. And that, again, is very, very important because, of course, we can't deny that this is going on. We can't deny them access to appropriate levels of news and media input, but we can deny them access to stuff that's going to make them feel really, really overwhelmed and traumatized. Again, it's about striking a balance. I think as well, we as the professionals, if you're like me, a psychologist or someone who works with children, young people in schools, a teacher, a TA, we've got to look at what we already do well in schools, because this kind of situation can make us feel so overwhelmed that we forget the level of resilience we've already got. We forget the resilience factors and systems that we have in schools already to support children and young people when they are anxious, traumatized, overwhelmed, hypersensitized, etc. We've got a lot of stuff in terms of actually developing and maintaining trauma-informed classrooms. We have lots of work being done currently on mental health awareness, and this is something that we can build on from the pandemic. Many of our schools will have support for children suffering grief, loss and bereavement. And we will have support systems with our psychological teams for critical incidents. And again, this is very, very important because all of these factors, these are our strengths. We have this toolbox already, and we mustn't forget about that and get that kind of wiped out in our heads because we're getting so anxious and hypersensitive ourselves that we forget we have got a skill set here already for looking after our well-being and that of our children. We also create a sense of belonging in our schools. And don't forget, schools are, for many of our kids, for most of them in my view, a safe base. We understand anxiety. We understand not to punish it. We know about the neuroscience. We know about how to create calm corners and safe spaces where children can talk to adults compassionately and generate those compassionate relationships with adults who really do listen authentically. So again, don't forget this. We have this basic underpinning that we are really going to be able to pull on now as we seek to support our children through this next trauma. I think as well, we need to look for a balance. I'm a great believer when I'm working with anxious children, young people, in making use of what I call activity schedules. So timetabling in good bits amongst the bad bits, lovely situations, lovely times, lovely opportunities to do creative things, particularly play and artwork. So expressing myself through artwork, but actually going out there, playing, socializing. This is really important. And some of the children that I've spoken to have said things like, but I feel guilty when I come back and I've been out with my mates and then I think, oh gosh, there's a war going on. I shouldn't have had a good time. Remember this. It's like when kids are bereaved, when they're going through the grief process, they will puddle jump. One minute they'll be out there playing with friends and quite happy. The next minute they will be withdrawn and quiet and thoughtful and sad and somewhat depressed. And that's normal as well. So we need to normalize that, but also normalize this notion that we can mix the happy and the sad together. That's really, really important. I think Newsround from the BBC here in the UK is really, really wonderful. They present the facts of what's going on in Ukraine, and then they have a happy news story. And I think that's important. We need to make sure that there's balance. So scheduling in lots of balanced activities, normalizing the need for self-care, normalizing the need to go out and play on the playground, to walk my dog, to go for a swim, to go just out to play simply, very, very important, but also scheduling in and promoting positive psychology strategies, like looking for the good things at the end of a school day or just before you go to sleep, showing gratitude, keeping that journal, or just experiencing moments of flow. So every day just doing something where you stop thinking about the worries, the fear, the anxiety, the bombs, the war. I think as well, we do need to look very carefully and engage in what we call watchful waiting when we're thinking about children and young people's behaviours, particularly those who are more vulnerable. And some children might present as more clingy, might need more attention, more physical cuddles. They might withdraw, they might become hypervigilant or hypovigilant. So either way, you know, the hypervigilance might present itself as more aggression. They may not sleep or eat as well, become angry, irritable, tense. There may be psychosomatic symptoms that they experience too, such as stomach aches and headaches. And these, obviously, they're very real. Some kids may not want to be separated from their parents as much. They might be so worried about this that actually that's causing separation anxiety. And we need to be very clear, not all children and young people will experience this level of behavioural issue or emotional distress, but some may. So we must watch out for those. And I particularly flag up those from the refugee communities in our schools who will maybe really having some very, very desperately retriggering experiences and, you know, symptoms of PTSD at this current time. So we must make sure that we make use of the right and most appropriate support for them at this time. I think all of us can look for what I call anxiety reducing easy wins. And that's very, very simple to do. And many of our schools are doing it. And I think, again, let's celebrate that. Providing structure and routine reduces anxiety. Visual timetables. What am I going to do this minute, next minute, this lesson, that lesson? When's playtime? When's break time? Trying to keep that very, very balanced and similar. So the whole routine, the same. But also, again, that exercise, play, free time, balancing that, as I said, in terms of activity scheduling. I think as well, quality time together, no news, just fun, just relax, watch a movie, whatever it is. We need to really begin to timetable that in, put the phones away, that total digital detox, because it's the relationships, those relationships that we have are the things that actually heal us ultimately. So very important, we sit together, we reflect on the positives, we think about the good times we've had together as family, as friends, and really just limit that access to news. I think as well, there's something very, very important about looking for and celebrating the helpers, because we know that whenever there is this big trauma, whenever there is a war going on, when people are being displaced, etc., there will be people out there, and there certainly is in my local community. Our local Salvation Army are collecting resources, nappies, all sorts of things for people in the Ukraine. And I think it's really important. Let's look for them. They're the beacon of light here, because they really reinforce for us that human beings are good. They're not bad by nature. They're not born bad, as Robert Burns would say. Then I think we need to look at what we can all do, all of us, to help, because this balances the perspectives of the good and the evil and the horrible things going on. I think it's really important. It also gives us a sense of autonomy. If I think I'm doing something, even making this little video today, or, you know, going into Boots and buying those extra nappies, it's tiny, it's minor. I can't be out there fighting. I can't be out there giving immediate one-to-one psychological support for traumatized kids in Ukraine. It's not possible, but I can do this little bit. And immediately that makes me feel, yes, I'm contributing. I've got a wee bit more sense of control back. So that reduces anxiety. And I think that's the same for all of us. There was a lovely blog that was posted yesterday by John McMullen and Dan O'Hare, and I would really recommend that if you can access that, you do. Just Google it. They posted it yesterday on social media and via Twitter and net. And I have to say, it was very, very reassuring for me to read that from this pair of wonderful psychologists. And I think the quote that they ended with, which just really, really struck me as something very, very positive and lovely. And it is about this notion of, if we only see the worst, I think it destroys our capacity to do something. If we remember the times and places, and there are many of them, where people have behaved magnificently, this gives us the energy to act, and at least the possibility of sending this spinning top of a world in a different direction. And they quoted there Howard Zinn, and that resonated with me so much, because it's this notion again for me about looking for the helpers, being able to make that difference. I think we need to highlight the things that have gone well or better in the past, and relive those, anchor ourselves back into them. That gives us a sense of hope. It can get better again. And also highlight when people have overcome adversity and the damage of war and persecution. Think of South Africa, think of Nelson Mandela, etc. I think as well, highlighting what is good, genuine, compassionate, and wonderful about the human soul. There were two opera singers, and I'm a great fan of opera, passionate fan of opera, who were singing together at the weekend. One was Russian, one was Ukrainian. And at the end of the performance, they held each other in an embrace, and the whole audience said, peace, peace, peace. And I think for me, that's what this should all be about. That's what we want. That's what we all want. So let's just look out for those helpers and look out for those people, the real good humanity in them that is there, and it's there for all of us. And I think My inspiration for this, apart from my lovely lady in the Powers group yesterday who talked about look for the helpers, was Fred Rogers, of course, because it was his mother who said that to him when he was anxious about things going wrong in the world. She said, whenever there's something going wrong and people are being bad and there's a big trauma, there's a war, people are being displaced, she said, look for the helpers. And Fred Rogers said, to see people who will notice a need in the world and do something about it, those are my heroes. And I would absolutely concur with that. So thank you for listening. And I really do pray for peace in Ukraine. I hope that this tiny contribution makes a difference or is a wee bit helpful to people. My heart is with you, Ukraine, and I'll just stop there.